Good evening, Space Monkeys. Welcome to the Final Fantasy Wiki podcast version 12 or something. I don't know how many we're up to. This is our biannual podcast that we do every so often, usually about twice per year, about various things. And this thing we're doing this time is Final Fantasy XVI, which was announced about a month ago. But now we have just enough content that we can actually discuss it. I'm your host, BlueHighwind. Joining me tonight are somebody who just yelped.
Catuse.
And yelping person. Okay, sorry. I spoke over both of you.
Yelping person. That's the other name I go by, I guess.
Yes. So now that I stepped over both their introductions, they are Technobliterator and Catuse. This is an extremely professional operation we have here, which is why we usually get about 30 views. We earn every single one of them. So, Final Fantasy XVI is the upcoming Final Fantasy game. It is the first Final Fantasy that's been announced, the first mainline Final Fantasy that's been announced since about 2006. Am I right about that?
I believe that's correct. Well,
yeah, I mean, that's about right.
Because Versus 13 was announced at the same time as 13, or thereabout, and Versus 13 became 15. So, yes.
Well, no. 14 was announced about 2010. Or 2009.
But I don't know. I don't know if we want to count 14 as mainline. Though we do have to talk a bit about 14 today.
We do have to talk about 14.
14, I believe it was announced roughly 2006 as well. But like this is basically the first Final Fantasy that's a new like setting completely from the ground up. So like, I mean, Versus 13 obviously morphed into 15, right? And that was within the 13. It was originally within the 13 setting, and then they moved away from that a little bit as the development went on. Yeah, so this is the first really new Final Fantasy that's been announced in a very long time.
Yeah, it's been a weird about 5 years since Final Fantasy 15 came out, because basically throughout my entire career as a Final Fantasy fan, there's always been the next one coming out. There's always been that thing you look forward to. It's like, all right, well, maybe this E3 will finally get to see the new Versus 13 trailer. And then you never do. And then through all this, it's like, finally, oh, here we go. 16, the next number after 15. There's going to be a future. History has not ended. And I guess we should also mention the... what was that other game they announced at the not E3 from Sony back in, like, July?
Oh, that's a good question. The fact that I don't remember suggests it didn't make much of a splash.
No, it really didn't. I'm gonna look it up because I want to get the name right. I remember. It
wasn't the mobile, was it?
No. It's the one that's going to be the next Crystal Dynamics game.
Oh,
no, not Crystal
Project
Dynamics. Crystal Tools, White Engine.
Yeah, so you mean the team that made 15?
Yes.
They are now making Project something or other.
Project Althea is the other game.
That's the one. And it's not a Final Fantasy game.
But it looks just like one. So I don't know what Project Althea is going to be, but it's not Final Fantasy 16. So we might as well forget about it ever, because that trailer left me with literally no hope that game will ever come out. But Final Fantasy 16 looks like a game that'll be out in late 2021, early 2022, which is really exciting.
Yeah, roughly, yeah. So, what they've said is, at least what we've heard from Jason Schreier, is that the graphics that are being used for 16s, and actually Yoshi P said this as well, like the graphics that have been used in the 16 trailer aren't quite done just yet, because he didn't want to give the impression that 16 will be looking way better than it might actually end up looking on release, which is what they tend to do when they have those CGI trailers. So instead, he put the graphics together, a realistic picture of what they're working with in-house right now. And that's why some people have compared it to basically 14, but slightly upscaled a little bit. So I do get the impression that 2021, like late 2021 or so, is a realistic picture of when this could come out, but it could come out a little bit later.
It looks like it's being made in Unreal Engine 4, and it definitely looks like an Unreal Engine 4 game. Like the trailer, I remember some people were a bit critical because you could see some graphical mistakes here or there. It didn't look absolutely pristine or perfect, but it did look like a next-gen game. Did somebody log out? What was that? Oh, you know what? That's my computer complaining about virus and threat protection, which will come up in the audio. So everyone, you're going to hear that note. Techno and Catuse, you won't. Sorry.
Great.
Well, it is what it is.
Yeah, it's what it is.
And that virus just made me lose my train of thought. I had something to say.
Well, we were saying the graphics. That's where we were. That's Unreal Engine 4. We should also mention who's directing this. That is Hiroshi Takai, who doesn't have a page, so I don't quite know who he is. But it is being...
so Hiroshi Takai has worked with the series before a little bit, but he's never directed a game fully.
Okay.
However, the producer of this game, Yoshi P, is best known for Final Fantasy XIV, which by all measures was a huge success for the company.
Okay.
We should stress for those who maybe aren't so in the know that beyond being a huge success, before Yoshi P, Final Fantasy XIV was the laughingstock of the gaming industry.
It was I'm trying to think. It was the Avengers of its time.
It was the game where they did the opposite of what they're doing here, where they put so much into the graphics that they put more pixels in a fucking flower pot than that it would like lag the entire server. It was just absolute madness, and they had to shut it down, start it up again, and now FF14 is now like one of the most successful games of the franchise. And you can really see a lot of the style of Yoshida and this creative business unit 3 that he runs in the FF16 trailer and in what we've seen so far.
Well, critically, it's the most successful Final Fantasy game of this decade. Well, this last decade.
Perhaps ever, I would say. It's definitely surpassed Final Fantasy XI in pure revenue, and the MMOs have to be the most revenue-generating games of them all.
Yeah, so obviously financially, it's their most successful game. Period. Like full stop. But like critically, it falls just the most recent expansion pack, I should say, fell just short of Final Fantasy IX in terms of how well it scored among reviewers. Now, how much stock you want to put in that, like, is up to you entirely. But just for context, Demon Remake got 87 out of 100 on average, which is still pretty decent. But Final Fantasy XIV got like 91 or 92 or so. And for context, 13 was around 80. And 15, I believe, was like 78 or something like that.
I mean, another way... I'm sorry to step on you, but another way to judge this is gamers are horrible. They're the worst people in the world, and they're toxic assholes. And Final Fantasy XIV, from what I can tell, I'm not huge in that scene, but it does not seem like everyone hates that game. Like, everyone...
Right. No, the only things that people hate are the slowness of the content cycle, which has been slowed down by COVID, and the ERP community. Everyone hates the ERP community.
Okay. So yeah, so it's actually... This is a weird year, 2020, because it's terrible in so many ways, in countless ways, but yet it is actually a good year to be a Final Fantasy fan. We have we have a Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, I was about to call it Versus 7. Which would have been a more Actually, that would have been a more interesting title for the entire project, I think. Final Fantasy VII Remake. We have Final Fantasy XIV. I think it's like 4.1 was the most recent patch, right?
Yeah.
Might be 4.2. And Final Fantasy XVI actually looks good. We should probably discuss this game's actual content. The basic bitch way of putting it is that it's a low fantasy kind of thing, so people have compared it to Witcher 3 or Game of Thrones. For better or worse, that's kind of the best way to put it. It's definitely a return to more of a medieval kind of view. There's no spaceships. Yes?
So, my confession is that when I first saw the trailer for 16, that's exactly the vibe I got. The vibe I got is, alright, so this is just their version of competing with Dark Souls, with competing with Game of Thrones, with competing with whatever that's out now, right? And I wasn't, like, offended by it or anything, Like I wasn't like upset by that. It's just that's not my kind of thing. Having seen the concept art on the website, I don't get that impression anymore at all. And the reason for that is basically like if you look at the concept art that they've got on there, it's very distinctly Final Fantasy-esque. So even if the presentation may remind some of a more style kind of thing, a more like a mainstream fantasy setting that we get these days, like even if the presentation may appear that way at first, the actual concept art is very distinctly a Final Fantasy style. And you can even see that with Clive in the first trailer, right? I mean, as soon as you look, the first opening shot is of Clive, and the first thing that pops into your head is, okay, this is Final Fantasy.
Yeah, and like the like sort of low magic, but not really. Is I mean, it's kind of the art style of Evil East. It's the art style of FF14 as well, where you have this like very medieval society in the form of Eorzea, and then you have these like techno Romans, and you're like traveling between dimensions and crap. But the setting of the base game is very much like low fantasy. So this is not like Final Fantasy's first traversal into, oh, you think it's low fantasy, but there's crystals and like a magic plague, and all of the rulers of all of the different kingdoms are like the embodiments of summoners, which is I guess this is like their take on the l'Cie or whatever.
Yeah, I was going to say 14 kind of reminds me more of an early modern setting, to be a annoying pedantic history major. That's how I'd put it. It's not really medieval because it's like Age of Exploration and that sort of thing. Final Fantasy 16 though is looking very medieval. But we do already have kind of like a setting, like they sent us kind of like a design doc of their ideas of all the kingdoms. Is like something when you're writing a fantasy novel is like the first thing you write down is like, okay, here's a bunch of names and here's a vague outline of what all these countries are about. It kind of seems, what is it? Type 0 is kind of what it reminds me of in a certain way.
Oh, so a Type 0 comparison to somewhere else, and actually I mean, when I think about it, yeah, I can kind of see that, but my initial reaction was that it was more like Final Fantasy IV in a way. You know, you've got the Kingdom of Baron with their own crystal. You have the Kingdom of what's his name, Edge's Kingdom. They've got their own crystal.
That's a long out of my head at that point.
Yeah.
I played Final Fantasy IV 8 years ago, so I could not tell you at this point. No, wait.
But I got the same sense of that, where you have all the different kingdoms, all with their own crystals, and that's kind of like a series tradition in a way. And Type 0 is obviously the more recent example of them kind of like calling back to that a little bit. With 15, you had a little bit of that with its own crystal, but I mean, 15's story is hard to like decipher because of how it was presented. But basically, like, yeah, the impression I got is it's very rooted in the series' early history, which is why, like, even though I had the initial, like, oh, Game of Thrones, Witcher 3, kind of, even though I had those vibes initially, when you look more into it, it's very much, it's less that they're trying to, like, follow what people are doing these days, and more so that they're trying to harken back a little bit to the series' roots, because, like, the last two mainline games that weren't 14 have both been sci-fi-ish settings. We haven't really had one of the older settings since, like, I mean, Evil East was kind of like that, but we haven't really had a proper medieval setting since 9.
Yeah, I actually don't think it does harken too much back to the original. I think it really is much more like Type 0, because you have all these kingdoms that look like they're in some way in competition with each other, and they have a kind of dark connection with magic. So in Type 0, what it was is that they had their own kind of l'Cie, and the l'Cie kind of had to sacrifice themselves in order to create these master summons. There's a really dark scene where I think they summon something like Knights of the Round or Bahamut, and major characters all start dropping dead at once. And this one, it looks like they're going again with that kind of 13 or, Type 0 connection where magic is sort of a curse, where you have our main character and his younger brother, Joshua, who is somehow connected to Phoenix. He's Phoenix's dominant. And this is all just kind of... The original Final Fantasy games were more about high fantasy exploration. It's like, all right, let's go to the next town, let's solve the dungeon, and that sort of thing. Seems a lot like this isn't going to end well for these characters. I don't think Joshua makes it to the second act, is my impression.
All indications, all indications talk about like some sort of tragedy involving Joshua and Ifrit. So Joshua is dead. I'm if we have some sort of Deadpool going for the characters of 16, I'm betting right now Joshua just bites it. But I think the way the conclusion that we're coming to here is like, in terms of setting, it maybe is a lot more like it harkens back a lot to the older games, but in terms of tone, it's a lot closer to 13 or Type 0 or 15.
And definitely in terms of gameplay, this is not going to be a party RPG at all. It's another action RPG.
They hired Ryoto Suzuki, who is the designer of Devil May Cry 5 and Dragman's Dogma, for Creative Business Division 3. So there is a very good chance that this is an action game. This is not some turn-based RPG.
No, we're never going back to that. That's what Bravely Default 2 is. That's all you're going to get.
Okay, so two things on that. The first of all, like, just a quick point, I can kind of see the Type 0 comparison given that there's actually blood in this game, right?
Yes.
Which is something the series doesn't do a whole lot. So there's blood in this game, so I can get they're going for a more mature tone. Now, secondly, and more to the point, like, with the gameplay itself. So yeah, this is an action game, and frankly, the action combat looks like really good. So I thought the Final Fantasy hadn't really been all that great at action combat until 7 Remake, which I thought was their first like successful action game, and even then, it was still rough around the edges.
Yeah, I have big problems with that game's combat.
Yeah, so there's still a lot of polishing to do there, but I think the foundation they laid down there was solid. So let's see what they're doing with the action combat this time. So I'm very open-minded as to the action combat. And I think this is going to be a recurring theme for me throughout like all of my like takes on 16s. But basically, like, Yoshi P is the one running this. Yoshi P is the guy who turned around the biggest laughing stock in the series to the biggest success in the series. So, I mean, if anyone can make this game work, it's him.
Well, I want to go and make it clear. Yoshi P is like an executive producer. He's got his hands full with Final Fantasy XIV. He's not doing the Tetsuya Nomura thing where he's making 2 games at once. We do know the director is Hiroshi Takai and is being produced by Noaki Yoshida, who I think is someone else.
Which is Yoshi P.
That is Yoshi P?
That's Yoshi P.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Why is he called Yoshi P if his first name starts with an N?
The P stands for producer because he started as a producer of Final Fantasy XIV.
Okay, so there are several people named Yoshida. There's also a character designer named Yoshida who has nothing to do with any of this, so sometimes I get confused. Sorry, guys.
Right.
But Hiroshi Takai is the guy who's listed as director, so this is more his game. Now, in video gaming, the terms director and producer are a bit more fluid than in the film industry, but usually in Japanese productions, director is where the buck stops. That's usually the guy who puts the most credit. But he's a new name, so they're going to go and put out Yoshi P first as the one that they want to get fans excited about.
Right, but again, remember that the team, I should say, like the team that Yoshi P runs, it has a very good track record.
Yeah.
So that's why, like, anytime I have like, I'm not so sure about this game. Anytime I have those nagging thoughts, it's instantly backed up by, I know the guy who made this has such a great track record so far that I'm pretty sure they wouldn't let us down.
We should also make it clear, considering we've been talking about 14 and 16 so much. 16 is a single-player game. It is not a multiplayer MMO. I don't know if it's going to have any multiplayer function in it. So far, it looks like primarily a single-player game. Looks like it's primarily going to be one story. I don't know if they're going to... They haven't announced this like this is the start of the 10-year plan of Final Fantasy like they did with 13 or anything like that. Looks like they're making one game. It's coming out. There might be DLC. I don't know anything further. So
The
you know, it's
only-
very standard.
The only real reservations I have for this game in terms of gameplay are that from what they've shown us, and they haven't shown us a whole lot, to be fair.
No, they've shown about 30 seconds of combat, and I think that was mostly idea combat, not anything finished.
Right, but they haven't shown us any indication that we have other party members to control.
I don't think we're going to.
Yeah, this is going to be this is going to be an action game. This is not party members.
I mean,
but action games can work with party members, as seen with 7 Remake.
I guess to be clear, 15's first trailer only showed Noctis and not the other guys. So, but then again, Noctis was really the only playable character until later patches, which I never played. So Noctis is the only one I ever played as. We should mention. Oh yeah, sorry.
Right. So my reservations being firstly that we haven't seen any other party members, and secondly, like there were rumors that this game would include a job system, and I haven't seen evidence of that just yet. Now, I'd love that to be the case. I think that'd be really fascinating to see how the job system would apply to an action combat system. But, I mean, if it's not the case, then that's a little bit disappointing to me.
Yeah, I don't know.
I don't know. I feel like, like, once you start tacking on, like, a bunch of, like, RPG stuff just because you can, like this does not necessarily make it a better game. Like I'm thinking back to, this is going to be a very weird comparison, but I'm thinking back to, like, Monster Hunter World, where they take Monster Hunter and they add a bunch of, like, I guess RPG stuff just because they can. And
I never played Monster Hunter, so I don't know.
I'm probably going to piss off all the like zero Monster Hunter fans watching this podcast, but it felt like it didn't really add that much. It was just sort of there. I don't know.
Catuse, I'm going to kill you. No, I've seen it. I don't care about Monster Hunter. We have not even mentioned the main character's name yet. That's what I've been trying to say.
Yes, we should talk. We should talk about the characters because there's 3 of them, and we got to talk about them.
Well, there's 3 that's been announced. There's almost certainly going to be more. So,
so here's the other comparison.
Yes,
is the main character actually has a normal last name, right? He's called Clive.
Well, normal where you're from, I guess. That's not a name that goes about in this continent much.
Huh, that's true.
Yeah, we don't have many Clive Owens in American film, but Clive Owen, English name, yeah. Yeah, he's Clive Rosefield, and his little brother is Joshua Rosefield. They're both the sons of the Archduchy of Rosaria, or Grand Duchy of Rosaria, sorry.
Right.
Anyway.
And the sons of the Archduke.
Yes, and they also have a female friend named Jill Warwick, not Jill Nabat from Final Fantasy 13. We see
Jill, yeah.
We've seen Joshua and Jill in kind of an early stage of the game, and we've seen Clive in that early stage, and we've seen an older version of Clive who has now grown a beard and is edgy, and in artwork has a fiery hand for some reason. So maybe he becomes Ifrit. I don't know. Something happens with Joshua when he turns into Phoenix, and then appears to die in the trailer, but we don't know. And that's all we have, really. That's it.
And there's like a promotional image of Clive just like slicing Phoenix in half.
Oh, really?
Or I guess that's what's happening here. I'm not entirely sure.
I'm looking at the artwork now because something was attacking.
See, like, he cuts through the room, and the Phoenix just bursts into flames, and one of its wings falls off. That's what it's
okay.
It's
very hard to tell. Like I couldn't tell what was even happening because it looked like the trailer is cut well enough to get you excited, but it's not cut well enough for you to actually know what the hell's going on. Because something happens where Joshua turns into Phoenix and then maybe is fighting something else, maybe not. And then the man on fire from Metal Gear Solid 5 shows up.
Yeah, maybe that guy is the nominative Ifrit.
Maybe he's a bad guy, or maybe he's Clive that's gone crazy. I don't know. I could tell you the lore behind Metal Gear and why that guy is on fire in Metal Gear Solid 5, but we don't have time for that.
That's true. Yeah, I will have to say, like, so far, like, the characters of 16 are the least interesting part to me. To me, like
Well, we
I
don't
do
know
feel
them
that
yet.
I haven't seen enough of them, so I'm
Yeah.
reserving judgment. But so far, the characters are the thing that just haven't excited me at all. Whereas every other aspect of this game has, in some way, at least intrigued me.
Oh, one last thing I wanted to mention. Joshua is a name that has appeared in this series before. That's that's a kid that got kidnapped in Vagrant Story. He was the son of a different duke. Yeah.
Well, that also gives you other like indicators that this game is harkening.
Yeah, they're both like, innocent little boys. So
Yeah.
maybe that's a reference, maybe it's not, who knows.
No,
Yeah.
I don't think it's a reference. I think so much that like and you can see with how all the characters have like distinctly English accents and how like and you can even see it in the kingdom names. And in fact, like actually the kingdoms have flags and they all kind of remind me a little bit of the 14 ones, the 14 grand companies a little bit.
Yeah, I can see that.
So I really do think that they're getting inspiration more from like the series past in terms of fantasy settings than they are like just trying to copy the latest trend. So I think I can understand why people think that they're just hopping on the bandwagon of Game of Thrones a little bit. Because I mean that was my first impression, but when you look more into it, more to it than that.
Yeah, also Clive kind of looks exactly like the Final Fantasy XIV hero when he grows up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've seen a lot of people make comparisons there as well.
Well, the comparison is that in the older expansions of FF14, the like generic warrior of light looked like a kid. He didn't have a beard, and he was just this like happy guy going around. And then as the story of 14 gets darker, he starts getting like grizzled like skin. He has like scars. He gets this huge beard.
He starts his daddification journey. Yeah, he's increasingly becoming a daddy.
And that's exactly what happens to Clive. He starts off as this cute little, like 14-year-old or whatever, and then some time skip happens. I don't know, maybe Joshua dies or something, and then 10 years later, he is now, he's now like the Witcher or something.
Yes, he is now. We have boy Clive and we have daddy Clive. That's how we gotta go put it. Do you think that Cloud is going to become a daddy during the course of the Final Fantasy VII remake?
Well, I mean, he kind of is in Advent Children in a way after he adopted
he's a fucking deadbeat in that. There's no daddy energy to him.
We don't talk about Advent Children.
We don't really want to. Yeah,
that movie sucks.
Yeah. So, do we want to put final thoughts out? Because we've kind of gone a half hour. I don't think we can go much further on this.
Yeah, I think this is a good place for final thoughts. Who wants to go first?
You can go first.
Me? Okay. So, I've seen not a whole lot from 16. Like, they haven't showed us too much yet. But from what I have seen, like, every element at least intrigues me. And at best, it excites me a whole lot. So, for instance, the action combat, it intrigues me, right? I mean, it could work out really well. It could be a great combat system, or it could just be, like a kind of action combat system that is fun, but is not my kind of thing, So I'll just have to wait and see on that. The characters are the only thing that really haven't, like, intrigued me a whole lot. Like, they just seem like RPG characters a little bit. And that's not inherently bad, but, I have to wait and see more before I judge anything on that. Now, the setting looks fascinating to me. The setting looks like another, like, really good, like, political intrigue story in the vein of Ivalice, in the vein of 14. And to be real, like, Final Fantasy has never, like, basically since 10, too fast, since 7, has always been really good at world building and creating interesting settings. And 16 doesn't look like it's going to fall short on that front. But the only thing we have to wait and see is the presentation of it. So, for instance, like, 13 and 15 had somewhat intriguing settings, but they had terrible storytelling, and therefore those settings just completely fell flat. So we'll have to see how that works. Now, overall, what I think is, like, I'm excited for it, but it's like a cautious optimism. So for every element of the game where I think, I'm not 100% on that, I'll have to see the execution first, I have to remind myself the guy directing this is Yoshi P, has an excellent track record, and therefore I'm very excited for this game. Now, I'm not more excited for it than I am with 7 Remake, but that's purely down to personal taste. So I think this could be an excellent entry to the series, and I'm intrigued to see where it goes next.
Okay, Catuse, you want to go?
All right, so with regards to the story, I'm very curious to see how it will play out. I'm actually pretty excited about that, because it seems like just from this like little design doc, as you called it, that they put out already, there's a lot of like plot lines that could go somewhere, or maybe they'll just get abandoned. But there's this one country in the east that's trying to conquer everything. People are fighting over this like central crystal thing. There's this magic plague. There's the like adoptive sister who's totally not going to betray them. There's what I think I already called like Square Enix trying to do the lassie, but this time actually tell a good story with them for once. There's just a lot of different things going in the pot, and I hope it all works out. And I'm pretty excited for the story. I feel like I don't know enough about the gameplay or the combat system to have much of an opinion about it. I really hope that they don't go for some sort of weird hybrid RPG action thing that ends up being ends up just being like either really brain dead or just kind of clunky.
A lot of them have ended. Well, all right. So Final Fantasy 15. 7 has been a step up from that, so hopefully 16 is a step up from there.
I haven't played the 7 remake, but I've heard good things about it, and it was a step up from 15, which was not great. I think there was a trend for the Final Fantasy games a while to make the games, their combat systems, make them more complicated as they introduce more action elements, but also make them easier so that you never get to use all of the cool stuff that they're throwing at you. And I hope they don't do this again.
Okay.
I hope they get that right. That's my 2 cents on the game.
All right. I will end this out. As you may know, I have been a salty bitch about Final Fantasy for a very long time. I've been salty about this series longer than I've been happy with the series. It's been a bad 10 years to be a Final Fantasy fan. Real bad 10 years between 13 and, well, I guess like the last 5 years things have been going better. If you're in 14, you've had good times. I'm not. So it's right about this year that things have finally started to turn around. Kingdom Hearts 3 came out. Final Fantasy 7 Remake started well. I don't know how well it's going to end. And you know what? I'm just going to go all out in it. 16 looks friggin' good. I'm excited for this game. It's probably the game I am most excited for out of anything coming out. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. There's a Fox game called Tunic, where you're a tiny little Zelda fox. That's probably the other game I'm most excited for. And then there's this. So yeah, I can see the series back on track. Let's get some good single-player games out again. Let's have 16. Let's have 17 in 2025. Let's have 18, and we can keep going for the rest of our lives and put this terrible decade of bad ideas behind us, hopefully. So I'll just go.
Decade, but around.
Yeah, as the world gets worse, maybe Final Fantasy will get better. So I guess that'll close us out then. We'll be back in something like 4 to 12 months when the next big Final Fantasy thing of some kind happens. So
that's probably going to be Forspoken, but yeah.
Yes. Okay. Bye, everybody. We'll miss you.
Bye.
Bye.